Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're dismantling an illusion that honestly affects every single one of you.
Yeah, it really does.
Because, usually when something goes horribly wrong in our lives, we have this deeply ingrained, like almost primal expectation of finding a clear, visible cause.
Right. It is incredibly comforting to just point a finger. Someone made a mistake. Someone broke a rule.
Exactly. Find that person, punish them, and magically the system is safe again.
We crave that binary simplicity, because it makes the world feel predictable. We desperately want failure to be neatly categorized as a single isolated event caused by a single isolated person.
But today, we're going to completely upend that way of thinking.
Definitely.
Whether you are managing a massive corporate team or, just cooking a family dinner or boarding a commercial flight for a vacation, this deep dive is going to fundamentally change how you view mistakes, risks, and safety itself.
Because the diagnostic landscape of a disaster is actually incredibly murky.
Oh, it really is.
It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. The whole idea of human error is, well, it's often just a convenient mask covering up much deeper, invisible vulnerabilities.
And to guide us through this, we have an incredibly fascinating stack of sources.
You really do.
We're pulling from real-world aviation catastrophe transcripts, specifically the terrifying 2023 Washington, D.C. mid-air collision and the tragic Air India Express Flight 812.
But we're also looking at a massive Brazilian food safety study covering over 1,500 restaurants.
Right, and some French aeronautical investigation modules on human factors, plus the internal disciplinary standards from the Nursing and Midwifery Council. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's start with a statistic from the sources that perfectly illustrates the blind spot we're dealing with. Historically, an astounding 75% of aviation accidents have been broadly blamed on human error.
75%? That's wild.
Yeah, and it's not just airplanes. In a 10-year study of chemical accidents in South Korea, researchers found that 76.1% were attributed to the exact same bucket, human error.
I have to push back on that human instinct to blame the individual, though.
How so?
Well, blaming human error for a systemic disaster is it's like blaming a driver for running a red light without realizing their brakes were intentionally cut, the road was covered in black ice, and the traffic light itself was short-circuiting.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Right. Yes, the driver technically went through the intersection, but looking only at their final action completely ignores the entire environment that made the crash inevitable.
It totally ignores it. And it captures the exact frustration that drove a psychologist named Professor James Reason to introduce a completely new framework back in 1990.
Right, the Swiss cheese model.
Yes, he created what is now globally known as the Swiss cheese model.
It sounds almost too whimsical for something used to prevent nuclear meltdowns and airplane crashes.
It does sound funny, but the visualization is profound. Reason proposed that complex systems don't rely on just one single safeguard.
They have backups.
Exactly. They rely on multiple overlapping layers of defense. You have automated technology, strict physical barriers, operational rules, and finally, the human operators themselves.
So imagine those defensive layers as slices of Swiss cheese standing parallel to one another.
Precisely. And because no system is perfect, the holes in the cheese represent the inherent weaknesses in each of those defensive layers.
So under normal circumstances, a hazard might slip through a hole in one layer, but it gets stopped by the solid cheese of the next layer.
Exactly right. Disasters only happen when the holes in every single slice align perfectly. That alignment creates an unobstructed trajectory of opportunity for a hazard to pass right through the entire system.
Well, reading through the French aeronautical modules, I noticed they break down those holes into two very distinct categories, which feels crucial here.
Yeah, they aren't all created equal.
Right, you have active failures and latent conditions.
Understanding the difference between those two is, it's the key to this whole philosophy. Active failures are the sharp end of the stick.
Like the immediate action.
Right. This is the pilot pushing the wrong button, or the nurse grabbing the wrong medication vial. It's an immediate action with an immediate negative impact.
But the latent conditions are the, what do they call them? The resident pathogens hiding in the system.
Exactly. Resident pathogens. These are things like poor equipment design, inadequate training, chronic understaffing, or a corporate culture that prioritizes speed over safety.
What's fascinating here is how those latent conditions can lie completely dormant for years.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, they are built into the system by policymakers, software developers, or managers long before an accident ever happens. They just sit there, quietly rotting the wood, waiting for the right act of failure to finally trigger them.
And that chain reaction is exactly what Dr. Scott Chappell and Dr. Doug Wigman mapped out when they expanded reasons work.
Right, into HFACS.
Yeah, the Human Factors Analysis and Classification System. They didn't just list failures. They showed how one level actually causes the next.
Okay, walk us through that.
Well, at the top, you have organizational influences. Imagine a CEO deciding to cut the training budget by half to save money.
Which naturally cascades down to the second level, right? Unsafe supervision.
Exactly. Because the budget is slashed, a middle manager forces their employees to work double shifts to cover the gaps.
Leading directly to the third level, which is preconditions for unsafe acts.
Right. Now you have an operator who is suffering from severe sleep deprivation and terrible morale.
And finally, that environment produces the fourth level, the unsafe act itself, which can be an unintentional error or an intentional violation of the rules just to get the job done.
Yes. The act of failure at level 4 was entirely engineered by the latent condition at level 1.
So we see how this theory works on paper. We know it requires this cascading alignment of multiple layers.
Yeah.
But what does that perfect fatal alignment actually look like when the stakes are life and death? Let's trace this out in a high-stakes environment.
Well, looking at the 2023 Washington, D.C. mid-air collision between an American Airlines passenger jet and a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter, it is a textbook example of this alignment.
It really is.
If we trace the layers of defense, the very first latent condition was ironically created by success.
Right, because the U.S. aviation industry had gone 15 years without a fatal commercial crash.
Exactly. That level of safety bred a deep cultural complacency. Everyone collectively started to believe that major disasters only happen in other parts of the world.
So that complacency was hole number one.
Yeah, and hole number 2 was the physical infrastructure of the airport itself, Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, or DCA.
The constraints there are just staggering. I mean, DCA was originally designed to handle 14 million passengers a year. In 2022, 25 million people came through it.
The infrastructure was bursting at the seams. Our sources note there were 503 significant air traffic control lapses recorded there in 2023 alone.
That is a massive latent pathogen sitting in the system. And it gets exponentially worse with hole number 3, which is severe understaffing.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, I panic when I have 2 pots boiling on the stove at the same time. Imagine being the sole controller responsible for a sky packed with millions of passengers worth of flying metal.
It's unthinkable.
Because that night, an air traffic control supervisor allowed a controller to leave their post early. Instead of the standard 2 people dividing the insanely complex tasks of managing both helicopter and jet traffic, only 1 controller was left on duty.
And this isolated staffing issue connects to a much wider organizational influence. The DCA control tower had only 19 fully certified controllers, far below the FAA's target of 30.
Right, and the sources mentioned this shortage is playing out against the backdrop of a class action lawsuit regarding FAA hiring practices.
Yeah, where applicants' alleged tests were thrown out for racial demographic reasons.
And obviously, we are completely impartial on the politics surrounding that lawsuit. We aren't taking any sides there. But the undeniable result on the ground was a severe systemic bottleneck in fully trained controllers available to staff the tower.
Exactly. So let's look at the board. You have an overcrowded airport, a single overworked controller, and widespread cultural complacency.
Those are the latent conditions just waiting in the dark.
Yes. Then the active failures click into place. The Army Black Hawk flies a half-mile off its pre-approved course and is cruising at 400 feet instead of the mandated 300 feet.
Simultaneously, the lone air traffic controller offers the American Airlines crew a choice. There's heavy traffic on the main runway, so the controller asks the crew if they want to take runway 33 instead.
And runway 33 is much shorter and requires a much more demanding, complicated approach.
The crew pauses for 20 agonizing seconds. A plane in front of them had already refused the switch because of the difficulty.
But after 20 seconds of deliberation, the American crew accepts. They take the harder runway.
If they had just said no, their flight path would never have crossed the helicopters. They didn't break a single rule, but that decision was the final act of failure that allowed the holes to align.
It is a terrifying sequence of events. And we see a similarly tragic alignment in the sources detailing Air India Express Flight 812 in Mangalore in 2010.
Oh, that transcript is absolutely heartbreaking to read. Let's walk through the latent conditions there. First, the physical environment.
Yeah, Mangalore is a tabletop runway.
Right. It literally sits on top of a hill with steep drops on all sides, meaning there's zero margin for error. Furthermore, because of the terrain, it lacked a standard RISA, a runway and safety area.
That's the physical buffer zone designed to catch a plane if it overshoots the tarmac.
Exactly. Then you add the environmental conditions. It was raining heavily, making the runway incredibly slick.
But the most critical latent condition was the physiological state of the operator. The highly experienced captain had actually been sleeping for a significant portion of the flight.
Chronic pilot fatigue leading to severe sleep inertia. When he finally woke up for the descent, his judgment was completely clouded.
Yeah, he initiated an approach that was too high and too fast. That is the active failure right there, an unstable approach.
But even then, there were still defenses left in the system. This brings in HFACS Level 2 Crew Resource Management, or CRM.
Right, and this protocol is explicitly designed to empower junior officers to speak up if they see a danger.
The first officer saw the unstable approach and explicitly told the captain to abort and execute a go-around.
But the CRM failed. The captain overruled him, completely ignoring the warning.
The plane touches down way too late on a wet, short runway with no buffer zone, but incredibly, there was still one final slice of cheese.
Even on the ground, they had a brief window to execute an emergency go-around and pull back into the sky.
But due to panic and hesitation, they missed the window. The plane went over the edge.
When you look at it mapped out sequentially like that, it's devastating to see how many chances there were to break the chain.
You know, hearing it described out loud, it doesn't feel like a neat, static line of cheese slices falling like dominoes.
No, not at all.
It feels incredibly dynamic. It's more like a giant combination lock. The tumblers are constantly spinning, the weather is changing, the fatigue is setting in, the infrastructure is aging.
Yeah.
And a disaster happens when all those tumblers click into the absolute worst possible position at the exact same millisecond.
A spinning combination lock is a much better way to conceptualize it, honestly. It highlights that systems are never static. They're always in motion.
Right.
And this dynamic spinning lock doesn't just govern high-altitude aviation. It governs the food we eat and the hospitals we visit every single day.
So let's bring this down to earth. Because that culture of complacency doesn't just plague cockpits. It's the exact same pathogen infecting everyday life.
Absolutely.
Our sources include a massive study from Brazil applying the Swiss cheese model to food safety across 1,536 restaurants.
The researchers mapped out 7 distinct layers of defense designed to prevent a hazard like Salmonella or E. coli from reaching a customer's plate.
What were the layers?
Well, the first 2 layers are administrative controls. So that's providing adequate facilities and proper training. Those are your latent layers.
Okay, makes sense.
The next 4 are behavioral controls, using safe ingredients, maintaining environmental hygiene, adhering to personal hygiene, and ensuring safe food temperatures. And the final layer is the overall system controls.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The study revealed a crystal clear cascade effect.
Right.
Distal failures, meaning failures in those deep administrative latent conditions, inevitably triggered proximal failures in human behavior. It is essentially the broken windows theory applied to a commercial kitchen.
The broken windows theory is a perfect parallel. It suggests that visible signs of disorder or neglect encourage further bad behavior.
Right.
If a restaurant manager doesn't provide a good physical environment, say a kitchen with a constantly broken ice machine or a lack of easily accessible hand-washing sinks, the workers will start using unsafe shortcuts just to survive the dinner rush.
If you've ever worked in a restaurant with a broken sink, you know exactly how this starts.
Oh, yeah.
If the management doesn't care enough to fix the plumbing, why should the line cook care enough to walk all the way across the kitchen to wash their hands while tickets are piling up?
Exactly. They become complacent.
And the data from Brazil proves this. A staggering 65% of the violations found in those 1,500 restaurants were in the personal and food hygiene layer. That was the slice of cheese with the biggest holes.
Those behavioral active failures at the sharp end were directly caused by the latent facility failures at the blunt end.
Which perfectly explains why modern healthcare is completely rewriting their rule books. We looked at internal standards from the Nursing and Midwifery Council in the UK, specifically Commitment 4.
Commitment 4 is a really fascinating piece of policy. It explicitly states that when systemic issues prevent nurses or midwives from delivering safe care, The system should be held accountable, not the individual.
They are realizing that wrongly blaming a nurse for a one-off error doesn't stop the underlying issue from happening again tomorrow to a different nurse.
Exactly. If someone gives a patient the wrong medication, the old instinct was to fire them.
Right.
But Commitment 4 says, wait, why did they give the wrong medication? Was it because two completely different, highly dangerous drugs were packaged in identical vials with the exact same font and stored in the exact same bin?
Or, as the document points out, did the nurse miss a critical care task because the hospital's staffing levels made it literally impossible for anyone to complete the required workload?
Right. In those cases, the root cause is not the individual's fitness to practice. The root cause is the latent condition of the working environment.
Holding the active failure accountable while ignoring the latent condition creates a false sense of security.
It really does.
It's all about shifting the perspective from the person to the environment. But, if this Swiss cheese model is so universally applicable from airplanes to restaurants to hospitals, we have to ask the difficult question, is it actually keeping up with how complicated the modern world has become?
That is the exact debate currently raging in the academic safety community.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a strong critique, led by safety scientists like Sid and Decker, arguing that the Swiss cheese model is fundamentally outdated for modern technology.
But wait, looking at that cheese model, it feels so comprehensive. What is the actual blind spot they are pointing out?
Well, Decker argues that the Swiss cheese model shows us what failed, but it doesn't really explain why the holes were there in the first place or
Right.
what specific forces pushed them into alignment.
Okay, I see.
The model assumes linear causality. Event A causes event B, which causes event C.
Like pushing a line of dominoes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in our hyper-complex, modern, globally integrated systems, accidents almost never happen in a straight line. This limitation led to a newer approach called systems thinking and a specific model known as STAMP.
STAMP, Systems Theoretic Accident Model and Processes.
Yes. STAMP views safety not as a series of barriers to be breached, but as a control problem.
Interesting.
In a complex system, people are rarely just breaking the rules for fun. Instead, they are constantly making micro-adjustments to everyday pressures. This is called normal operational variability.
Think of a train dispatcher rushing a departure because they're 10 minutes behind schedule, or a cook skipping a minor prep step because the lunch rush is overwhelming.
Exactly.
So if Swiss cheese is a line of locked doors, STAMP sounds more like a massive group chat where everyone is slightly misinterpreting everyone else's texts until a disaster happens.
That group chat analogy is spot on. STAMP focuses on how these normal variations interact with flawed feedback loops.
Like what?
Did a sensor give slightly delayed information to a controller? Did management issue a mandate that inadvertently conflicts with a safety protocol on the ground?
Right.
When they map this out, it doesn't look like neat slices of cheese. It results in these hyper-complex, tangled spaghetti diagrams attempting to map every single interaction and feedback loop in the entire organization.
Okay, I have to jump in with a practical challenge here.
Go for it.
Because I see the academic appeal of mapping out this massive web of feedback loops. But if we draw a giant tangled spaghetti diagram where everything is ultimately the system's fault, don't we lose all practical accountability?
That's a fair point.
I mean, how does a mid-level manager actually use a spaghetti diagram to fix a broken train switch before tomorrow morning's commute?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have just hit on the exact tension between academic theory and boots-on-the-ground risk management.
It's a real gap.
It is. And we saw this play out in a Loughborough University study analyzing the 2007 Grey Rig train derailment in the UK.
That was the Virgin Trains Pendolino that derailed at 95 miles per hour because a mechanical track switch, a stretcher bar, had degraded and failed.
Yes, that's the one. The Loughborough researchers compared the hyper-complex STAMP model against an evolved version of the Swiss cheese model used by the ATSB.
The Australian Transport Safety Bureau.
Right. The researchers found that while STAMP provided a much deeper theoretical analysis of the feedback flaws that led to the poor maintenance of the track, the spaghetti diagram it produced was incredibly difficult for actual practitioners to read, understand, and use.
So how do you bridge that gap? How did the ATSB evolve the cheese to make it work for the people actually turning the wrenches?
The ATSB stripped out all the blame-oriented language from the original Swiss cheese framework.
Really?
Yeah, they removed highly charged words like error, and violation, replacing them with neutral terms to describe safety factors.
But just changing error to safety factor sounds like, I don't know, corporate HR speak. How does sugarcoating the language actually stop a train from derailing?
Because it completely changes human behavior.
Ah,
If your safety investigation sounds like a criminal indictment, the people working in the system will hide their mistakes out of fear. Neutral language encourages near-miss reporting.
that makes total sense.
The ATSB sacrificed a degree of that deep, tangled academic complexity for extreme practical usability.
Which is what you need on the ground.
Exactly. They created a framework where a diverse team of mechanics, corporate executives, and government regulators can all look at one intuitive layered diagram, quickly understand where the defenses broke down without feeling attacked, and actually fix the system before the next train derails.
So what does this all mean for you? We've covered a massive amount of ground today, from overcrowded airports to tabletop runways to broken sinks in Brazilian kitchens to the philosophy of train maintenance.
It's a lot.
It is, but the core takeaway for you, the listener, whether you run a Fortune 500 company or just run your household, is profound. We have to stop hunting for perfect people who never fail. Being fallible is simply part of the human condition.
Instead, we must focus our energy on designing forgiving systems, systems that actually expect human error and are robust enough to absorb it without leading to a disaster.
Right.
When something goes wrong, we have to train ourselves to stop asking who failed and start rigorously asking how the system failed them.
It is a total paradigm shift. But I want to leave you with one final, brand new, provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We've spent this entire time talking about human error and mechanical defenses. But as we move rapidly into an era dominated by artificial intelligence, how does the Swiss cheese model survive?
That is a terrifyingly fascinating question.
If an AI algorithm is dynamically generating our layers of defense, managing our air traffic control grids, or adjusting safety protocols in real time, who is responsible when the holes inevitably align?
Right, because they will.
If an AI makes a micro adjustment that causes a system to fail, is that a latent condition created years ago by the original programmer? Or is it a brand new type of non-human active failure? When the combination lock is spinning itself, who do we hold accountable?
We are replacing the human at the sharp end of the stick with a black box we barely understand. It brings a whole new level of complexity to those diagnostic muddy waters.
It really does, because maybe the X-ray machine isn't just broken anymore. Maybe it's completely rewriting its own code while we aren't looking. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of disaster. Keep questioning the system, and we will see you next time.